Morning, everybody. Oh, look at all those amazing Spectrum fans. No Commodore fans, no? Anybody? Couple skulking at the back. It's the best place for them. Welcome to the first talk of Crash Live 2023. I'd like to introduce you to the guests. Obviously, it's on the screen there, but as you probably well know, we have Andrew Braybrook and Steve Turner of Graftgold. Give them a round of applause. Now, when we had Zzap Live, back in August, we had a little sound test before the talk. But actually, the sound's working pretty well. I think everyone can hear me. Can everyone hear me at the back? Steve, can you hear me? Yeah, excellent. Okay. So the sound's all right. Last night I was testing the screen, making sure all the colours were nice, because we like the colours to look nice, don't we? And I tested all of them apart from brown. I didn't have time to do brown, so the only thing we've got to do is just run through a quick brown test to make sure the brown's working okay on the screen, and then we'll get on with the talk, all right? So anyway, let's get on with the test. So yeah, it's looking good. Yeah, that brown looks good to me. Oh, some more brown, yes. Yeah, lovely. And another, yeah, okay, yeah. Oh, very nice, yeah. Oh, a bit of yellow. Yeah, and another. Yeah, there's only 400 of these, don't worry. Yeah, another one, yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think the brown's working good, isn't it? So thanks to the Commodore 64 there. None of Andrew's games there, of course, because he didn't use brown in his games. Well, not much anyway. And to be fair, let's be fair here. You know, we're all friends. It's like 40 years later and everything. And the Commodore 64 didn't just do brown. It also did hazel, umber, beige, sepia, brunette, and my favourite, burnt sienna. So.
And a range of greys.
Oh yes, of course. Not forgetting the greys as well. Yes, good point, Steve. So anyway, let's get on with the talk now. And obviously, Graftgold are one of my favourite developers back in the 80s and the 90s. And these guys basically grew up with computers, the earliest part of computers, mainframes and so forth, and they grew up and started programming on all sorts of things, including this wonderful machine, the ZX80. So this was Steve's first computer, so I'll hand over to him to tell us a little bit about his first experience with the ZX80.
I think it still looks space age. It just doesn't look like anything else. And I got my first one as a kit form through the post. And I can remember opening up the box and seeing all these little bits. And even my wife, actually loved. She helped me put it all together and whatever. But when I'd done that, I felt really disappointed because it was almost just like Lego, and I thought I'd learn a bit about computers by putting it all together, but you didn't need, you just had to follow instructions really. It's a bit like making a bit of IKEA or something. So, but it kind of started me off. I felt, well, I want to know how this thing works. So I went down, and we had a good library with a technical section. So I got a load of books on chips, and especially Z80, and that's how I kind of got into, and I started to try and figure out, well, how the hell does this thing work? Because I couldn't see any graphic chips or any way that it's getting the stuff on the screen. And I thought, well, it's got to be doing it somehow, and because I wanted to do games on it, and I wanted moving games, but the silly thing, as soon as you started your program off, it all just went grey, and you couldn't see anything. And it was only when your program stopped that you saw your stuff on the screen. And so I spent a few months kind of reverse engineering the thing, disassembling the ROM, and that was before any of the disassembly books actually come out. I mean, later I found whole books that done the same thing, but in particular the first bit of the ROM had where it does the interrupts and whatever, and I found out how it was getting the characters on the screen using a combination of a timing chip and the CPU, and I thought, right, now I can do a game. So I programmed a little graphic of an asteroid, and the code had to be exactly the right length in time every cycle, and you waited till the raster went off the screen by using an interrupt. Then you tried to get your code in, and you had to code it exactly the right length. So when the raster come back on the top of the screen, you had an interrupted to time. And if you didn't get that time right, the thing looked like one of those old tellies that used to, don't know whether any of you are old enough for the old line tellies. They used to wrap round all the time, but that's the kind of effect you had. And when you got that, you added up all the T states of every instruction that you've done. And remember, I'm writing in hex, not in anything else. And you adjusted it until the thing kind of looked like an asteroid. And one day I actually got an asteroid going across, and I had a witness there, and that was the only time I did it. And the next day I opened up the magazine, and the ZX81 was there, and I was so distraught. I spent 3 months trying to get this one asteroid moving across the screen.
And it's funny you mention asteroids as well, because not just growing up, but as young adults in Whittam and Chelmsford in Essex, you both of you separately, to start off with, like to obviously frequent all the local pubs, and I think this was where your love of games, because you mentioned that the first thing you wanted to do on the ZX80 was produce a game, and this came from your love of games, which was playing arcade machines, particularly this one, in the various drinking establishments. So maybe, Andrew, you could tell us a little bit about your early experiences with asteroids and its ilk.
Yeah, asteroids actually was in the chip shop at the end, so that was always our last visit of the Friday night. We would go round probably 4 or 5 pubs to play 4 or 5 different games, because I don't know whether the pub owners had all talked to each other to make sure that they didn't have the same game, but they always had something different from each other. So we'd tour around on a Friday night. We'd go into all the machines that we liked. There was Battle Zone and Breakout at the time, and Space Invaders, Missile Command. This one was the end of the road of the Friday evening for us, because the chip shop had this one, and getting your bag of chips and playing this game probably took a bit longer than it would normally take just to get some chips, but yeah, we loved this game, and we weren't that good at it particularly, but we all loved this one, and we always played it every Friday night.
And of course, playing games such as these, it obviously influenced both of your early careers. Steve's with the 3D Space Wars games, which we'll get onto in a second. But of course, going back to the ZX80, ZX81 situation, having seen this advert for the ZX81, Steve, very quickly it was eclipsed again, wasn't it, by this lovely machine?
Well, absolutely. Having sort of missed out the ZX81 and thinking, oh, you know, I'm not going to buy that after I've wasted all my time on one machine and whatever. When I read the first ad, this thing does colour and it can do moving graphics. I thought, right, I'm going to get one of the first ones of these, and this time I'll apply the knowledge that I already know and work out how this one works, and I was sure that I could do the same sort of thing that was around in the arcades at the time. So yeah, I duly bought one of the first Spectrums, got my order in. It was only a 16K one, which was a bit of a mistake. So I bought one of those extension RAMs, and don't know whether any of you had one of those, but you just press the little rubber key a little bit too hard, the thing on the back wobbled, and that's it, all your work just kind of disappears in front of your eyes. And luckily my wife didn't mind typing it all in again for me, so.
Oh yes, the long-suffering Julie, yes, okay, fair enough. And then obviously combining the Spectrum and, you know, moving colour graphics, well, hey, and your love of arcade games, obviously your first game was arcade-themed, 3D Space Wars.
It was, and funnily enough, it was actually kind of influenced by Space Invaders, because the idea was to take Space Invaders and put it into a 3D environment. So, yeah, the little ships, they start in the distance and they come towards you. I thought, oh, I won't have them in just a boring pattern. I'll make them a little bit more freeform. But essentially, it's the same mechanism. You've got different levels, and each level gets harder and has more and more ships. But very simplistic. But it was well within the capables of what abilities of what the Spectrum could do.
Yeah, great little game as well, very playable, and of course this being 1983.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's pretty much what everyone was sort of playing these sorts of games, and then obviously at this point Graftgold is nowhere near to be seen, is it? You're trading under as a sole trader.
Yeah, I started off just on my own, and I think I lasted about 2 months on my own. I was getting really bored, and I'd already met Andrew. I think we met actually by an arcade machine. A mutual friend sort of introduced, oh, this guy writes games on his mainframe at work.
In my own time, I wish to point out that was in my own time in the evening. I wasn't writing during the day, but everybody cleared out the office at 5:01. That was leaving time, and the big bosses made sure nobody left before that time. So everybody packed up their desk at about 5:01 and was sitting there with their arms folded. But nobody was allowed to move until 5:01, and then the office cleared. So I had the whole office to myself. I had all the terminals. And I could just sit there, and it wasn't really. I would sit there until the security guard came round at about 10 o'clock on his rounds, and I knew it was time that I should go home. But yeah, it was great having the whole machine's attention. I could type in my programs, test them online, and you couldn't do that during the day because you had to share 6 terminals between 40 people. I was proving to myself that there was a better way of developing programs full stop if you could actually have access to a machine all the day, because most of the time we were sitting at our desks poring over listings, and that seemed inefficient to me. But so in the evenings I was really improving the way I was working and writing games at the same time. So it was a win every way.
But away from computers, yourself and Steve were forging a friendship elsewhere, weren't you, with regards to the musical?
Absolutely, yeah. So Andrew played bass guitar and I played lead guitar in a little local band. Don't think we were sort of much good, but it was great fun. We kind of played all original numbers in those days. It wasn't covers, was it? Andrew and his Rickenbacker, Geddy Lee look-alike, long hair. I don't think I had long hair in those days, did I? But yeah, so it was quite good. So we already had a shared interest, and because when I found out he could program, and I'm sitting all alone, getting a bit kind of a sort of manic, just me and the computer and sitting sort of staring at the screen of the blank wall. Well, one Friday night I just said, "Do you want to join me?" And
Yes, please.
yes, please. And we went down the pub and had a drink, and that was that. And I copied the contract. We were both professional programmers before we got into games, so it was unusual. We were never kind of like the bedroom programmers type people, but it gave us a kind of bit of an advantage because we knew how to do kind of structured flow charts and design the program. So even though we didn't program the same kind of language, I could draw little charts of how my games work and hand them over, and we had a kind of language that we could speak, and then Andrew used to take my little diagrams and then just code them up in 6809 on the Dragon.
Oh yes, the Dragon 32. Wales' pride. So tell us a bit about the Dragon 32, Andrew, and because obviously this was a lot of people think you started off on the Commodore 64, but of course you had one of these before, and you used it to convert Steve's first game, 3D Space Wars, I believe.
It was all down to my dad, really, because I started the same way as Steve with my dad bought a ZX80, which was a kit, and he put it together because he loved putting things together. Then we did go to the ZX81, but it was really my dad's annoyance with the rubber keys and the fact that the machine wasn't very stable sitting on the ground, that he wanted a proper keyboard, because I think he wanted to write letters and things on his computer. So we picked one of those, because it was a little bit before the Commodore 64. And that one looked a bit more solid, so it was it's all down to my dad really, because he paid for the machine, but then I was the one that got to use it most of the time. And yeah, I enjoyed learning on that machine because you could type nice and easily on the keyboard, and there was plenty of information about it because it was based on the Tandy colour computer. So I got a manual for that, I got a book for 6809 assembler, and just started teaching myself how to write a prop routine without an assembler to start with, but I was at least writing out the code on a piece of paper, then I had to work out all the hex for it, poke that into the machine and then run it, and I was just proving to myself that yeah, I can do it, but it's hard work. And then we got a proper assembler for it and a couple of disk drives. And it was a nice machine to work on.
Well, it's good to cut your teeth, wasn't it? At least, if nothing else. And it does have a very nice keyboard. So.
And I must admit, I was jealous of this lovely keyboard sitting doing me rubber keys that sometimes wouldn't work. Although I love the smell of the Spectrum, the little feel of it, and the little curve. But I bought a big keyboard and then mounted my circuit board in that keyboard, and that got rid of my problems of pressing too hard, and it all kind of disappeared. But I must say, I've still got the original or the second Spectrum, because I bought a 48K Spectrum, and I've still got that at home, and I've never actually got rid of that. That's in my cupboard. But my big keyboard and the additional disk drives and all the non kind of Sinclair stuff is all gone, but I've got the little black box.
Excellent. And obviously, as we've already seen, your early games were published by this company, Hewson, and they were obviously integral to Graftgold, certainly in its early years anyway. So, Steve, tell us about your relationship with Hewson and how it began with the Zzap trilogy.
Well, it was very good, because my first game I sent to 3 publishers, and 2 of them replied and said, "Oh, we're interested, come up and see us." And the other one I got, "Oh, yeah, it's nice, but send us something else." So yeah, they lost out. And I chose Hewson because he actually went to my school, and which kind of immediately kind of gave us a sort of bond. We knew all the same area. And whatever. I didn't realise. I think he was a couple of years above me, but I didn't know him at school. But yeah, we talked about that. But his key thing, he decided that he was going to do his own tape duplication. So he had this little unit on an industrial estate, and he could make up all his tapes. And I realised that was a really shrewd move, because instead of having to order loads of tapes and try and guess how many you're going to sell and whatever, he could just print them off as need be. And his dad used to run the tape machine. So it was very much a family business, and his brother used to be the product manager. I don't remember his wife or his mum kind of doing anything, but it was a nice kind of friendly family business, and he seemed to have a very, very good relation to the press in the early days. And he used to take us there, and he introduced us. And we had these lovely little kind of press parties whenever we had a launch of our products, and it made you feel kind of that you were part of that publishing process. And we kind of lost that completely in the later years, but you know, it was a sort of lovely time, and it was a very kind of close relationship. But the most important thing of all, he didn't tell us what to do. We had complete control. He'd comment on things when we took it to him, but he didn't say, oh yeah, I think you should do this sort of game, it's got to be this, and it's got to be this. He'd just say, well, I don't know what that is, what's that? When I first took him at Avalon, he sort of looked at it, and well, I had a wizard that fired wizards walking around rooms picking up wizards, so you had to use a bit of imagination. But all of a sudden, when I got a couple of graphics in, he suddenly twigged and realised that was something else. But he recognised a good game when he saw it, and so did his brother, and that's really the key thing. So he knew and he trusted that he could just leave us to do our bit, and we more or less left him do his bit. Although we wanted far more control, because when we saw some of the first artwork, we thought, well, why doesn't it look like the game? Why don't you look at the game? I think that the 3D Space Wars cover you saw is perhaps one of the best, because it relates to the game, but some we weren't very happy with. I think the Paradoid one was the one we were least happy with.
Yeah, that didn't really reflect the game too well, did it? But the next game, after this lovely picture of you wearing a Space Invaders jumper, Steve.
Yeah, I think Andrew Hewson took that photo himself. I said
That must have been your favourite jumper.
It was, and I think that picture was used. I did a series of articles for a magazine. I think it was Sinclair User. Hewson used to write for the magazine, and he said, "Oh, you know, I haven't got time to do this. Would you like to write for them?" So I took it over and used to do a kind of double-page spread. I think it's called "So You Want to Be a Programmer," and you can still get those articles on the web, and they're quite fun to look at for me now. I think, oh, it's actually quite good when I put there. But that was the picture that they used and the thing that I learned, I don't know whether as a writer you've learned this trick. We used to get paid for the page, and the more diagrams and pictures I put up, the quicker it was to do.
No, sadly that doesn't happen anymore. But anyway, moving on. Let's move on to the games, because that's what we all love, really, isn't it? And this one is called 3D Sidab Attack, which Sidab is obviously baddies backwards, which is quite a nice name still. I remember thinking that was quite cool still. And I don't know if anyone can see the influence of a certain sci-fi film in the cover. Anyone know?
War of the Worlds?
Correct.
Absolutely.
Well done. Yes, War of the Worlds. And initially, 3D Sidab Attack, Steve rather optimistically wanted to call it War of the Worlds, until obviously someone got in touch, a little tap on the shoulder from Andrew Hewson, I believe it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, he phoned me up one day and said, "Oh, I've just had a phone call from a big lawyer in Hollywood, and they're going to sue us unless we change the name." And I was saying, but it's public domain. You know, the author's been dead for God knows how long years, and they're saying, "Oh well," they say they've got the rights to the film, and that's a recent property and whatever, and I haven't got the money to pay for the legal fees, so we'll have to change the name. This was all a couple of days before the release, and so we didn't know what to call it, and I think Gordon Hewson came up with a name, and it fitted. So
Jobs are good. Yeah.
very quick bit of changing of the title screen and whatever.
Obviously it's another space type shooting game, but you were obviously experimenting with different techniques and working in different frames and getting different styles of graphics. So this is 3D Sidab Attack. The Sidab have invaded Earth. Was that the plot? And you're defending Earth, so that it's basically a ground-based shooter. Or was it the Moon? I can't remember.
No, it was the Earth. Again, there's a little bit of a Space Invaders influence in this, in that the armour's like the little bases at the bottom of Space Invaders. So when the alien missiles kind of come, they gradually eat away your armour. So all I was doing was sort of wrapping it up. And this time it's almost like, well, instead of lots of Space Invaders, you've got the little space buses that used to go across the top attacking you. But the idea for the city at night came in a dream. I was dreaming that I was at a computer show and I saw this magnificent game that was just done by putting all the lights on the screen, and it was a helicopter flying over in New York. And I was thinking, wow, that is a brilliant idea. Wish I'd thought of that. And then I woke up and I thought, I have thought of that. so I immediately started drawing the diagrams and testing it out, and the effect. I hadn't seen anything like it. I thought, oh wow, that really works.
Yeah, it looked a really good game at the time. I remember playing it, and notably quicker and a bit more impressive than a lot of the other games that came out. And then after that, you concluded the original trilogy with 3D Lunatic, which again you tweaked things, a bit nicer loading screen this time, and it's again kind of ground based, but with some aerial sections as well. So tell us a bit about the genesis of this one.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at doing a kind of flight simulation. I quickly realised that at the time that doing sort of loop-the-loops and making the horizon completely kind of go upside down was beyond what I could do on the Spectrum. So I thought, well, let's put the horizon as several sort of sprites, and let's see how far I can get away with not actually tilting the sprite. So it's all illusion, and your mind sort of sees the whole thing as kind of tilting, but everything is actually horizontal. So I could get the speed up, and my one thing that I wished I'd done a little bit different in Side Up Attack was when I sort of played it after it was lit, I thought, oh damn, I've made the main tank just a little bit too slow. So in this and it wasn't because the game was slow, it was just the speed that I put in, and I could have changed that. So in this one I thought, right, I'm going to get the speed in this one and get the kind of freedom of movement, which made it quite different. And I wanted to get the sight like a predicted sight, which some people I showed the game to didn't quite get. They're saying, well, the bullets don't go towards your sight, but they drop with gravity down to the ground, and the predicted sight shows you where the bullet will be, like when you fire it.
Yeah.
And it's also was different in that the mode of the game changes when you lift the sight up past the horizon. It changes into aerial mode, and then you get a missile coming in, and the little things that look like Hawker Harrier jets kind of come in, and they were designed just to make you panic, because I think you had about 5 seconds before they come close enough to really cause damage to you. So you had to get your sight up there and a missile fired off. But I like that element of putting pressure on the player at times.
Yeah, it was very good. And of course, Andrew, this was your first Commodore 64 game. So if we can go back to you and talk to us a bit about. See, there's no Brown there, is there? He knew what he was doing. There's no Brown. Tell us a little bit about this conversion.
Yeah, I first converted Steve's Side Out trilogy onto the Dragon 32. We found out that Dragon 32 sales really weren't up to much, and they were heading downwards. So I switched to the Commodore 64, and I converted my own version of it, I suppose, because I still wasn't getting any source code off of Steve. We just had the diagrams, as he said. And this time, I thought, well, I've got to get used to a new machine, so let's do a game that I already know. And let's use the Commodore 64 as a ZX Spectrum because it's in high-res mode. So using none of the toys that machine had got, but I got used to hardware sprites and things, and wrote a bigger version of Lunatic, because Steve's original was on 16K Spectrum, then I did put it on a 32K Dragon 32, and then finally on a 64K Commodore 64. So I was getting more space every time, so I was thinking of new things I could put in there to use up a bit of the extra space. So I put maps and things in this one. But I was just trying to stay true to the original game, and follow somebody else's design before I got a chance to do my own designs.
Well, again, it's quite interesting because you're cutting your teeth, aren't you? Like you did on the Dragon 32 with programming, now you're with games design, you're taking someone else's games design and just refining it a little bit and learning how to do this.
It takes a lot of the pressure off because you're learning to do part of the job at a time, and you know the design already works because you've already done it, and somebody else has already done it as well. So yeah, just you can concentrate on just learning how the assembler works and the tools, all the development tools you've got to learn as well, and how to design all your graphics. So yeah, it's good to learn a bit at a time, and then you can move on to the next stage.
Now, at this point, the two of you, it's just the two of you still, and you were working in Steve's house together. Didn't have an office or anything like that. So I imagine it looked up, if you can all imagine like Steve and Andrew sitting opposite each other here. I mean, you know, the fridge might be a bit too modern, but you know, the flowers are nice. So I imagine Julie put the flowers there to just like spriten it up a little bit, and you know, you've got a Commodore 64 one end, you know, and they're looking over the monitors at each other, aren't they? And this is how it started off for Graftgold, as it did a lot of programmers, of course.
Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, I had a white table, which used to be a kind of dining table, but we also had a kind of octagonal glass table in the room, and Andrew had a little desk, which I believe was your dad's desk of some end, sort of over one side, and that's how we started off with just a couple of tellies, a couple of tape recorders, and we had a printer on a camping table in between the two tables, which we shared to do our listings, and that was the beauty of it. You know, you could start a business off with tens of pounds rather than hundreds or thousands, and it was a lovely sort of little atmosphere working in that dining room. I had a 2-year-old son at the time, so I kind of kept strict hours. I started at 9. I had tea break exactly, and my son wasn't allowed in the room until it was tea break. And he came and said, "Oh, Daddy, tea's ready," and my wife would make tea. And it kind of structured our day a bit. Andrew was on flexi time, so you generally were in a bit late and went home a bit late. It was hard to get rid of him in the evening. He just enjoyed. He didn't want to ever go on holiday.
No, it was the same with the weekends. You know what you're trying to achieve, and it comes to the end of Friday, and okay, we're going to go out and have a beer, but you think, well, I'm going to be away from the machine for 2 days. I'm not sure how I'm going to manage. And Monday morning couldn't come quick enough. It's very strange. It's all turned around just because it's just you're having such a good time. It didn't feel like a real job.
Yeah, that's very true. Right, we are about half an hour into the talk. We still haven't actually got to the start of Graftgold. So I think maybe we better move things along a little bit here. So Steve, having completed the SciDab trilogy, you decided to move on to something a bit more complex to sort of stretch your skills a little bit more. So tell us as succinctly as you can about the beginning of Avalon.
This really was a quantum leap for me, and we used to play Dungeons and Dragons, Andrew and me and a couple of other friends, and I thought, you know, it'd be good to get that kind of theme and feeling of exploring in a game. And I'd seen Attic Attack and seen how a kind of wireframe could be used to sort of suggest you're in a place. And I thought, well, what if you get that down so that the player's looking into the screen rather like a TV program? And I've got a couple of bits of paper, and I cut one out to represent the screen, a large A2 bit of paper, and then I drew just a wireframe kind of room in the other, and I kind of moved it behind the wireframe to check that it didn't look strange, because I couldn't alter the angles with perspective or anything. It just had to scroll about, and I found, well, it worked on paper, so then I did the same on the screen, and you can actually see parts of Lunatic in there, because the bottom of the wall is the horizon in Lunatic. I just changed that to wall graphics, and then I put the odd kind of feature like a brickwork, so that randomly, and there it was. I had a room kind of scrolling about, and at that stage, I really thought I'm really onto something here. And once I got a door working, and then just walking through the door, I think, wow, and it changed really quickly from one room to another. That's something you'll always notice about our games. There's none of this. When you go through a door, you have to wait for it to load something or to build the next screen and whatever. It's always instantaneously walking from one room to another. And I feel that's really important in a kind of active game. It's just sort of one of those little things that we used to do.
And of course, you followed Avalon up with Dragon Talk, which used a similar sort of engine, included this very nice map as well, which had a poem written by yourself on the back, semi-explaining in ultimate style what you had to do in the game, all these nice little locations. And you drew these locations, and then it was adapted by Hewson into this lovely map.
That's right, and I wanted to get a real sense of reality, and even in Avalon, I was kind of looking at books and picking things like the rod that Marek carries. The little bronze piece on the top is actually in the British Museum, and so I was kind of trying to make it as if it all could be true, and I based it all under the tour of Glastonbury. This one, I did a lot of research in the old realms of England, and I thought, yeah, there's a sort of certain romance. It was kind of influenced a lot by Tolkien. I liked his idea in his book that he had the lost realm of Angmar or something like that, and that was the feeling that I want to get, where there was a kind of sense of the history, and you told a bit of it, but not all of it, and it kind of gives you this feeling there's kind of something bigger underneath. And I tried to get the sense of that in the plot, and I think that kind of holds the Dragon Talk game together a lot better than the first one. Yeah,
both very good games, and in comparison with what else, I mean, don't forget, folks, this was 1984, they both came out, wasn't it? So a lot of other companies were still doing arcade clones, simple. I mean, Jet Set Willy was probably around, so a lot of games were platform clones or simple shoot 'em up. So this was quite different for the time, and it kind of propelled Graftgold into the big time. And actually, around this time was when Graftgold was formed, Steve.
That's right. I suddenly realised, well, if I get loads and loads of royalties in 1 year, the tax man is going to absolutely clobber me, and then next year if our games don't sell, well, I'll be stuffed. So I had a word with the accountant. He says, look, what you need to do is set up a limited company. I can take one off the shelf for you. So he got one. He said, it's got a funny name. It's called Graftgold. If you give us the new name in a couple of weeks, I'll set it all up for you. And we sort of thought between us, and we couldn't think of anything better. So it was just the name that the clerk who, you have clerks that set up hundreds of these like little companies, and it was just the off-the-shelf name.
It was just fate, wasn't it? Simple. It was a nice name.
Meant to be.
And then I don't know if any of you guys must remember the Dunderak, Tirnanog games that Gargoyle did. There's actually a similarity to those games to this one, because the third game in that series, Marsport, was originally meant to be another fantasy type game, but obviously Star Wars, I think it might have been Return of the Jedi had just come out, was a big influence. All the publishers wanted sci-fi games. And Steve, you originally intended there to be a third game in the Avalon Dragon Talk to make that a trilogy, but it ended up becoming another side-ad game.
Yeah, that's right. But I always had planned 3 games, and in the third game, the sword Caliburn was going to come into it, and in the stone, because it was going to end up the final scene where a kind of prototype Arthur takes the sword from the stone, and that was the whole reason of the first game, putting the sword in the stone at the end of the game. But Hewson said to me, he showed me the sales figures of Dragon Talk, and it hadn't done initially as well as Avalon, and he was projecting and saying, well, if you extrapolate this graph, we're not going to sell any in the next one. So I took his advice, and we made it into a space game. But I've always wanted to do the trilogy. To this day, I'd like to do the third one in the series, and to just kind of complete it, because it's kind of like an unfinished work.
I think you've got a few potential customers here, Steve, if you ever get around to doing that. And next up, actually, is a game not written by either of you two, and a conversion of a Commodore 64 game, which they said couldn't be done, Uridium. So this was written by Dominic Robinson, very talented chap who eventually joined Graftgold. So, Andrew, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the Spectrum conversion of Uridium, and don't forget that pint I promised you later.
Nobody had ever really considered that Uridium could be written on Spectrum because of the smooth scrolling at 50 frames per second rate. So we'd sort of pretty much forgotten about the idea, but I think Dominic had sent a demo into Houston demonstrating that he could get it running at least 25 frames a second, which again we hadn't even considered would be possible. Yeah, I think we went up there to have a look at it, or it was sent down to us and brought down to us, I can't remember, but yeah, we saw it and thought, well, this guy knows what he's doing. So yeah, I think he was brought in-house at Houston's to do this piece of work. So
well, yes, that's right. Yeah, and it's an incredible game. You did a marvellous job, Dominic, and I think it got crash smash. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it got crash smash.
Funny enough, Houston, like when he showed it to me, so it's just a demo. He's taken up the whole machine by putting the background in 8 times, sort of fully loaded out. So there's no way he could make it into a production game, and he was sort of poo-pooing it. And I said to him, look, this guy's a genius. Get him in.
Yeah, very talented chap. And as you say, he ended up joining Graftgold. So we'll come back to Dominic soon, I think. And then meanwhile, talking of the Commodore 64 and conversions, Steve, you were busy on this game. Just before we ask you about this, I'm going to ask Spectrum Hero again. We've got the War of the Worlds question earlier, so he gets to answer another one now. How do you pronounce this game? Ooh, he's done his research, hasn't he? So, yes, I always called this Quasatron growing up, but of course it's Quasatron or Quasatron, isn't it?
Quasatron. I say it.
Yeah.
As in quasar.
So tell us a bit about the genesis of Quasatron and Andrew's influence, obviously, with Paradroid.
Yeah, it was quite interesting because I'd seen a couple of kind of isometric games, and I was thinking, well, how have they actually done that? And I was kind of looking at some of the old games, like one of the earliest ones I remember was Ant Attack, and thinking, well, how do you do it, and how will the game work if things go behind things? And when I thought about it, I thought it would be actually better if things didn't go behind things, and if you could do a kind of convex kind of shape, and it turned out to be the kind of shape of a ziggurat. And I made a working demo of the game, and I called it Ziggurat, and I had no idea at all of what the game was going to be. And I had all the slopes and the whole kind of graphics in. I took it up to Houston and said, you like this, but what's the game? And so I had to come back, and I was trying to think of how I'm going to actually start walking characters up the slope, and I realised it would be much better if it was like a little droid with a little point. And about that time, Paradroid was absolutely a success, and we didn't think it would be possible to do a scrolling version of Paradroid on the Spectrum. So Andrew said, well, why not just put the gameplay on top of my graphic demonstration, because it looked like a Paradroid map if you looked at it sort of from the top, and all Andrew's mechanisms, like patrol points to send the little robots out, worked on because it really is a map with square tiles, just like Paradroid is.
And of course, it was another big hit, another excellent game, and another crash smash. And you took the concept of the well, you didn't just take the concept; you took the whole game, or this mini game, and put that into Quasatron as well. So did you try and come up with a mini game of your own, or just think that this was like just great and I should just use that?
No, we knew it would work well on the Spectrum, and they're actually Andrew's graphics there. He did all the graphics for me while I was doing the code, and then I just put them in. And yeah, I basically took his 6502 and because he started off with the source code and whatever, and I just changed it into Z80 and put it in, found a bug in it, but we won't mention it.
And then of course you use the concept again, this paradroid way of working, and use that again for your next game, Rana, another Hewson game, which rather unfortunately got lumped in by Hewson into sort of Gauntlet clone sort of thing that was happening at the time with the release of the official Gauntlet game. But it's actually a very good game, obviously, and a lot more complex than simply going around shooting stuff.
Yeah, the concept from the start was to do a kind of magical, mystical type paradroid, because I still like the paradroid kind of gameplay. I thought, well, it would work, and I can use magic spells instead of wizards, and make it the look more like paradroid. But I thought I'm not going to try and scroll the spectrum. Instead, I'll make it a flick screen thing, but I'll make the screen kind of open up as you explore it, which I don't think I've seen anyone else do at the time. It gives you a great kind of sense of exploration, and you can then look at the overall map that you get to deduce where there's secret rooms, and then search hidden walls. So it kind of all kind of added to the mystique of it.
And it was another big hit as well, another crash smash. And while we're on that subject, obviously, when we were at Zzap Live, Andrew was talking about his excellent relationship with Zzap and Newsfield. He did the developer diaries. And whilst you didn't do any developer diaries for Crash, you had a very excellent relationship with them, notwithstanding the reviews, which were usually good. This is a little preview here of Avalon, and then some reviews as well. Obviously, it was known as Legend of Avalon at the start, but the crash smashes were pretty much non-stop for you, Steve.
They were, and across quite a wide range of games. I tried to kind of make each kind of game have a thing to be. Avalon Dragon Talk was the exception, because one was kind of an extension of the other and kind of planned that way. But I didn't just stick to the same genre, and I like to kind of come up with completely different concepts, and it kind of worked, because I was just they have a common thing now. I try and create an environment in which is really believable and that you can explore, and I just love that in a game.
And of course, we got the holy grail of a couple of covers as well. Here's the cover that Ollie Frey did for Astroclone, so it's a very exciting, combative cover there. And then he also did a cover, this is one of my favourites, for Flying Shark, which we'll get onto shortly. And then this is the review for Lunatak. So this is from issue 4 of Crash. And in issue 4, it was the first issue where they actually gave out Crash Smashes. So before that, they had Games of the Month. And I think Orc Attack was the 3rd Crash Smash in the issue, and 3D Lunatak was the 4th. Can anyone remember the first? The first Crash Smash in Crash, in that issue 4. Wow. No Spectrum games at all, no one can think of any. Well done to the man in the front. Yes, Jet Set Willy was the first Crash Smash. So anyway, moving on. This started to become the start of Graftgold's publisher woes, in as far as we're approaching the end of the 8-bit era, or certainly, it's starting to end. And Steve, you're going to tell us a little bit about what happened with Hewson and why Magnetron, Quasitron's excellent follow-up, ended up being published by Firebird and not Hewson.
Yeah, I was working on Magnetron, and pretty much Andrew was in about the same stage of his game Morpheus for Hewson. We were just sort of presenting copies coming up to the final one. So we're in the later stages of it. So most of our work had been done, yet the publishing is still to be done. And we knew by this time, we knew Dominic and John from Hewson, and they used to phone us up on quite a regular basis and chat. And they started telling us these stories, saying things are going to pieces here. Bills are unpaid. staff are walking out, there's a lot of rows in the office and whatever. And then one day I had a phone call from his second in command, Debbie Silito, and she was saying, I've left Houston. And it was a real shock to me. She was kind of like the marketing manager there. And she said she's joined Telecomsoft, and she said, you need to do something because your games are not going to be published. Houston is going to disappear. And to me, that was terrible to have 2 games not published after we spent about 6 months on them, hadn't we? And, it would have just been doomed for us. So Telecom said, look, can we see the contracts? And whatever, said there aren't any contracts for the later games with Houston. He didn't used to do contracts. And so they said, well, we've got a big legal fund and we've got legal things, and we'll let them have a look at this. And they said, oh, they'll back us. They said, we don't think he's got any hold on you. We want to publish these games. Why don't you come over and work for us? And it seemed to us a no-brainer at the time, because 3 separate staff were telling us the same story, that that's it, he's going out of business. I think they were saying he's not going to publish the games. He'd arranged to kind of sub them to another publisher, and that was a kind of trick that publishers used to do. Because you used to get, we got 20% of royalties as a rule from Houston, but if another publisher published it, Houston may get 20% from them, and then we actually had a separate agreement with Houston that said we get 40%, but 40% to 20% isn't 20%.
Yes, yeah, it was a bit unfortunate, that, wasn't it? And then, of course, after all the sort of stress of all this, Houston pulled through.
Yeah, I believe Jeff Brown helped him out in the end, and it was a turnaround, and then kind of turned around and says, well, and we're not letting Telecomsoft publish the game, so our 2 games got us stuck in this kind of legal battle, in which we were just kind of almost like pawns. I remember reading one kind of press article. Unfortunately, the press, because Houston knew him so well, they kind of sided with him. And there was one article saying, oh, we've just done it for the money. But it wasn't. We weren't getting more money. The idea was we'd get some money rather than no money. It was survival.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Right, we got a Flying Shark was Dominic Robinson and John Cummings' excellent shoot 'em up, based obviously on the arcade game of the same name, called Sky Shark in America. I always thought John's signature in the bottom left was a bit unfortunate. Could have made that a bit clearer, the C there instead of but anyway. But yeah, an excellent game. But we're going to skip past Flying Shark because we're running short a bit of time. And I want to talk a bit about this game, Soldier of Fortune, because this is probably one of your lesser known games. It was written by David O'Connor, was it? Was this one of his game? Yeah, and one of the things that is quite, obviously the title is a bit odd considering it's a fantasy type game, was the advertising campaign which Firebird employed. So that's a screenshot of the game. So it looks a bit Stormlordish, doesn't it? And there's a fantasy plot behind it. You're collecting these things, aren't you? And this was the advert, which was a bit bizarre. I mean, obviously that's Humphrey Bogart. I did a bit of research prior to this talk, and apparently that's not from a movie. That shot. It's from an advert for the raincoat he's wearing. And yeah, it's like they took the title and decided on this rather bizarre advertising campaign. So as a result, obviously this game, despite being excellent, didn't really sell many copies. Steve?
That's right. I mean, if I recall, that they published a kind of group of our games at the time, but the game that they actually had and they spent all their publishing money on it, I think it was called Savage, which was a sort of barbarian copy, and the marketing manager loved it because he showed it to me, and it had a kind of giant sprite that was so big that you couldn't see it at time to react to axes and things come towards you. So I thought the game wasn't actually very good myself, but she said, look, we can't market something we can't see. Your game has such little sprites and whatever, but I don't think she understood the spectrum.
But I urge you, if you haven't played Soldier of Fortune, to check it out. It's a really, I mean, it obviously started off as like a Ghosts and Goblins type game, but it's been expanded a lot.
It's a slick game, and it runs at 25 frames a second, I believe. It's sort of one of the few games that does that. David came with the game, like that's what he bought with him when he came to his interview, and I looked at it and thought, oh, this guy really knows his stuff. And we offered him a job, and then I said, look, we'll get your game published, and he then spent a few months sort of rewriting it, and then John come in, wrote a sort of a very different version of it rather than copying it onto the C64.
Yeah, excellent game. So that's your homework, everybody. Right, on to the next game, and we have Intensity. So back to you, Andrew, because this is an original design by you, this game.
Yeah, I just like Steve, I like to change every game I do. I want to do something different, because you figure if I just wrote one shoot 'em up after another, I've already used all my ideas up on the first game. So I've got nothing left for the second game, so I like to change the genre, and I just wanted to do a little puzzle game, and I used the graphical style of Uridium, but we had a sprite multiplexer running, which took nearly all of the CPU time, so I wouldn't have time to scroll quickly. So I just made it a static puzzle game, which by good fortune made it convertible to the Spectrum and the Amstrad, which Steve here knocked up in no time at all, I seem to remember, even though it was my biggest program ever. It's a 29K of actual assembler code, which is nearly half the Commodore 64 and way more than that in the 48K Spectrum. So I'm not quite sure how we managed to fit it all in there anyway. Perhaps you can tell me how you managed to do it so quickly.
Did he stand up and go, "I'm finished," when he'd done it?
It was quite weird, because I took Flying Shark, which had a kind of 2x2 kind of tiling mechanism behind it, and although this one didn't scroll, Dominic's kind of method for doing that fitted into the game, and the size of all the graphics just absolutely dovetailed. So I took Dominic's code for that, so I didn't have to write any graphics code, and all Dominic's sprite routines just as they were, and I converted Andrew's code for the actual game code. My method of conversion was to convert the whole lot. I'd get all the code, 'cause by that time I was using a Z80 assembler on the PC. I'd put Andrew's code there, and then using editor kind of macros, just do replaces of the most common kind of instructions from the Z80, from the 6502 to Z80, and it was quite easy going that way, because the Z80's got a more comprehensive instruction set than the 6502, and then once I've got the whole code converted and compiled up, I wouldn't try and run the whole lot at once. I then get the control routine working, get that, and then get to the graphics, and then gradually kind of introduce the game routines in one by one, check them out and test them.
Excellent, excellent. And then we had this amazing conversion. It's one of the best arcade conversions on the ZX Spectrum, written by David, was it again, with graphics from John. And this had a bit of a convoluted history, how you ended up doing this, because obviously this is published by Ocean, the sequel to Bubble Bobble, the original Bubble Bobble, and it's a very sweet, peaceful game where you get to kill lots of things with rainbows. So maybe Steve, you can tell us about a little bit about the story of how you came to publish, or how you came to develop, Rainbow Islands.
Yeah, we didn't get every version, did we? Because we didn't have the console versions, but the Telecom Soft were quite pleased with what we'd done with Flying Shark, and that really put us in a pole position to this. And they came to us with it and said, well, do we want to do this? So I come up with a figure and thought, well, it's going to be darn near impossible. And they said, yeah, fine. And yes, so we started doing it, and it was the first real game that we were doing a real multi-format thing, because I think we did Spectrum, Amstrad, C64, and Andrew did the Amiga and Atari version. So it was quite a big project for us. It was the first time we had almost everyone in the company working on the same project. I was probably the only person that wasn't working on it at the time. I think Dominic he did the kind of operating system, and then Dominic was doing Simulacra. But most of the company was engaged in some way or the other. But we actually were given the arcade board and the cabinets. So David was very, very good at playing arcade games, and he could play the whole thing through. And John Cummins filmed him playing it one night, sort of through one end to the other. And they used the video that they produced to that, and he'd kind of scroll through the video and copy all the graphics from the video. But we also had quite a lot of design documentation, and there was some nice little extra bits in there we found, like there was a pickup that gave infinite power to the character. So the little diagrams, that had a thing, and he stripped off his shirt and he had a little Superman costume.
How did the game end up being published by Ocean, though, Steve?
Well, Telecomsoft sold out to Microprose, and the story I heard was that someone walked into Taito's office and said, well, we own the rights now, so we're going to publish this. And that's not how you talk to the Japanese. So they said, no, you're not. And they wouldn't even negotiate with them. So basically, we were stuck with the publisher not having the license to publish it. And in the end, I knew Fergus McGovern from Probe and was relating the story to him. And he was saying, oh, he knows the guy from Taito quite well. He'll have a word. And he had a word with them, and he also knew the guys at Ocean. And he was very good. He kind of did me a favour, and he acted as a go-between and actually made the thing happen. But at the time, it was a terrible blow for us because we knew the product was really good. We were so pleased with the results. And when you've done something like that and put your heart in it, and the whole company's worked on it, and then you realise no one's going to play it, it's just like a slap in the face. People were so depressed. And I can't remember whether people actually went there, but there were talk of people going, and shortly after, people left. And it wasn't just that game. We had a whole series of games that we started and for one reason weren't published. And you can't run a business like that.
Of course, 1990 was when Rainbow Islands came out, so we're right at the end of or more or less the end of the Spectrum era now, the 8-bit era. You did have time to do Super Off-Road, which was another arcade conversion, this time for Virgin, which was another excellent game. Which was that your last Spectrum game? It must have been one of the last, if it wasn't the actual last one, Steve, do you think?
Yeah, probably. I think I did the Spectrum version, didn't I?
Yes.
Because that was the first time that I worked with the team doing arcade conversions, because I was busy trying to fulfil this contract we had with Telecomsoft. When we signed with them, they sort of gave, it was the first time we ever had an advance, and they gave us an advance and said they want 4 titles over 2 formats. And we just were ages trying to satisfy this, and these were 8-bit titles, although when they seduced us into going over, they said, what we want you to do is work on 16-bit. But as soon as we'd signed them, they said, no, we want you to concentrate on all these 8-bit titles. So Intensity was one of those. But after that all happened, well, then I joined the team to do this one. This one, I believe it was Virgin that we did it for. They'd seen what we'd done with Rainbow Islands, and I think they actually come up with the offer and said, do you want to do it? And I jumped at the chance, and probably this was one of the most smoothest games with publishers in that era that we actually had, because it was actually finished and published for Virgin. The only sort of downside to it, there was a Game Gear version, and because we weren't registered Nintendo developers, they wouldn't let us do the Game Gear version. So this other guy who was working on his own, not Game Gear, it was the little Nintendo Game Boy. Yeah, because I actually did the Game Gear version, the little Sega and the Master System. Very lucrative. And he probably got as much as or far more than the Spectrum version, but under the contract, I had to surrender the Z80 source code. And so this guy got all my code to convert onto the Game Boy, which is a lot easier than having to do it and work out how you do it all yourself. And he even, some bits he couldn't get working, so he begged me, and one day he came down and I helped him with some of the work and got nothing for that.
Yes, but it is apt though, Steve and Andrew, that this was another excellent game. So throughout all the games we've seen, they were always very well, highly praised, whether they sold well or not for whatever reason, especially in Soldier of Fortune's case. They were always very excellent games, and I think the dedication to producing not only those excellent games, but also the variety of genres and excellent has shone through over the years, and is probably why we're sitting here now and there's so many people listening to us talk about these days. So if I could just go back to you briefly, Andrew, I just want to wrap up now and talk about the 8-bit era in particular, and working with Steve at Graftgold throughout the 80s, what that was like for you, what that means for you now.
Because there were lots of format wars and things, people saying, "Oh, my machine's better than yours," and that's all because we like to protect what we bought ourselves. There wasn't any such rivalry of machines. It was us against our individual machines all the time. So and we worked largely independently, and I was always trying to make sure that I impressed the boss, because when you're sitting next to the boss, you've got to do a good job all the time. We were competitive, when the old royalty sheets came in, it was who sold more this month, and it's usually Steve. We just enjoyed it, working on our individual machines, and we enjoyed play testing each other's games when we did, and just the whole 8-bit era was just. It was a time when each of us could do most of the work on our own games, so we had total control. We were designing the games, we were writing the games, testing the games, doing the graphics. Steve did a lot of my sound effects and music, and I did a few graphics for him on his Spectrum games. So we were contributing to each other's games, and I think we lifted each other's sort of quality to make sure that we were always doing the best that we could. So I thought it was great times. It's nice having the total control over your game. If you just think, right, well, I want to draw this and I want it to do that, you could just get on with it and do it. I didn't have to ask permission to do anything. And just seeing your games being reviewed and getting great reviews, it was all fantastic. And getting a cover on Zzap 64 when I got Paradroid on the cover, that robot blew me away. Ollie did such a fantastic job of that. I begged them to get that artwork on our cassette box, because the Paradroid artwork was not very good on the box, I didn't think. But we couldn't get it anyway. But it's just great to see that inspired such fabulous artwork, and Ollie got exactly what I was aiming for just by looking at the game and saying, "Oh, I'll pick that robot and I'll just render it as best as he could," and it just looked fantastic. So the 8-bit era was I think my best time, because I was just getting on with the job and was able to do it, and people were appreciating what we were doing, and as you've heard, there's been a lot of crossover. Steve's taken some of my designs, I've taken bits of his code, it was just a great time. Best job ever. I've always said that. Best job ever.
And have you had a holiday yet?
I can now have a holiday, yes.
Excellent. Before we take a few questions from the audience, Steve, can you just add your final thoughts?
one of the things that sort of I remember is towards the end of a game, you kind of get to a state when you're sort of confident. You think, well, it plays really nice and I love it, but what are the magazines going to think? And it's a sort of side of it you don't realise that there's a point where you've got to let go of this thing and you've got to stop working on it. You hand over your baby to the publisher, and then you wait. And sometimes I was so nervous I couldn't even look at the magazines. You wait and to hear what the feedback is before you read the reviews. And it's one set of it's sort of more relief when you open the page and you get something like a crash smash, because you just don't know what someone's going to say about something, and it's really like a stab. If someone even just puts a little bit of criticism, like I think on my first game they criticised the sound, but I used to plug my Spectrum into a 2x12 guitar speaker, and the sound was phenomenal, and I tuned it all up to the sound. So I was thinking, well,
Never heard that before.
people will plug their Spectrums into hi-fis and things. And I'd made up little leads that just went in mine, because it was just like a standard like little mini jack. And you only appreciate what I did with the sound if you do that, and you hear all these great big deep booms and things when you blow up, and the phasing of the laser shots instead of the little from the Spectrum. I think, well, you haven't heard the sound. How can you comment on it? You wouldn't say that. But you feel very, very kind of vulnerable at times like that, and I think it's a side of it people don't appreciate. But then afterwards, you get when not only the press, but then people at shows and things, and especially now, 40 years later, people still ask you questions about the games and say, oh yeah, I grew up playing that. You get such a kind of sense inside, that you've done something right and it was all worthwhile. And at the time, we thought these were like hit singles, like they were throwaway and people would remember them the next year. But how long we were.
Yes, we're all here 40 years later talking about them still, which I'm sure you couldn't have imagined back in the day. Well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Steve, for sharing your thoughts with us. Let's have a round of applause for these two chaps. We've got time for one or two questions from the audience. If anyone would like to, a hand shot up straight over here. Just go over here.
Are there any games that you wish you'd written? Any sort of games that you were jealous of that you really thought were good? Both, actually. Yeah.
A couple. Some of the breakthrough games on the Spectrum, like Night Law. As soon as I saw that, I thought, oh yeah, I'd like to do one like that. And I never did quite. I suppose Quasitron was the closest I kind of got to that, and that was me playing around with textures. But it was a kind of thing that I would have been capable of, but they thought of it first. And the other one later, I think I'd stopped work on the Spectrum. When I saw R-Type, I thought, wow, I don't believe that. And that's probably one of the only Spectrum games that I just felt I had to disassemble to find out, well, how did they do that? I don't know if I could do that. And when I saw it, it was close to some of the techniques that Dominic used to use, and I think Dominic actually sat by me and helped us find. We sort of searched and found the innermost graphics routines. But those two games kind of stand out on the Spectrum.
Andrew, is there anything on the Commodore 64 you wish you'd written?
Well, I was always chasing after the arcade games, because we played arcade games. We loved playing arcade games all the time, and their hardware was so much more expensive than the home computers, even though the actual CPUs were quite often 8-bit CPUs, some 16-bit. I'd love to have written some arcade games, to be honest with you, where they can just say, well, I want 1,000 sprites, and they'll go, yeah, all right, and then put an extra chip in for you and you can do it. So I wish I'd got some of Jeff Minter's creativity sometimes, because he was always writing such smooth games. But I like to think that I got most things out of my system in the time.
Yeah, fair enough. Anyone else got a question? Okay, sorry.
Hi. Probably should have Googled this one, so I didn't have to waste everybody's time. But who came up with the name Uridium and not using Iridium, which is the actual metal?
Yes, okay, that's an easy one. I was looking for a game name because what I was doing was taking my game work in progress to my ex-colleagues in Chelmsford from GEC. I used to go and visit them every weekend and take my latest progress copies of my games and just get their opinions and how playable they were. And it was one of the chaps called Robert Orchard who suggested the name Uridium because he had mistaken it for Iridium. So he got his chemistry wrong in the first place, and I like the name. We did look it up and go, no, because he said, well, I thought it really existed, and it didn't. So it was great because I think we got to the stage where, because of our trouble with the War of the Worlds game names, we wanted to come up with names that were our own words. So that just fitted perfectly. So it was Robert Orchard, who was one of my ex-colleagues from GEC. He suggested the name, and I liked it, and it stuck. And now we're thinking, because I think Rana Rama and Uridium were coming out about the same time, so we're thinking we're doing a crossover called Urirama or Rana Iridium. It all works. It's all great.
Excellent, thank you, Andrew. One more question over here.
Hi, Steve. For me, Dragon Talk is the best game on the Spectrum ever, and probably on any 8-bit platform. I've read your Twitter blog, and I believe you have some notes for the sequel. You planned it out. So my question is, how complete is the design for the sequel to Dragon Talk on paper? And how many children do I have to sell to make you produce it? I've only got one child, by the way, but you can have it if you like the game.
I got as far as I laid out a brief, not for one game, but for 3 games. So I thought, well, I'll start the trilogy again. And the first one was in more detail, but it sort of suggested, well, the synopsis of the N2 games. The control mode was completely reworked, and if I remember rightly, it was kind of on joystick directions, sort of looking at games like Mortal Kombat, how you got different things, and the easy spells were like single joystick shifts, and then you got another range of spells which was like double shifts, so you'd kind of go right and up or right and down, or you'd go right for enough, and they were kind of feeding the spells, so all the spells in a certain area, you missile spells all over to the right, and the stronger they were, the more kind of jiggly pokery you had to do to get them, but they were all laid out on the grid, so you could have a nice little diagram of the spells around you as you kind of learnt them, the different kind of things in. So rather like you're kind of whizzing your wand in a certain pattern. So all that was all worked out. The actual adventure mechanism was exactly the one from Dragon Talk. So how objects interacted with other objects. Maybe a couple of improvements, but that was actually coded up. And we actually had a character walking around picking up things, and it had the mouse sequence with the cheese and the holding the skirting board just there to sort of prove to a publisher that all worked. And the synopsis of the adventure, I'd listed out all the kind of stages of it, and it was basically there were dragon's eggs that you had to find, and these eggs had been planted under cities to kind of corrupt them, so you were trying to save the world, and the 3 adventures took you completely across the world. The first one takes you to Ireland and back into the Avalon kind of scenario and around Britain, and then it goes over to the Black Forest and under Germany and things, under Rome. There was one, there was Aztec temples, everywhere where there's archaeological ruins basically, and the idea was, well, these dragon's eggs have brought the civilizations down, and you're trying to save all the ancient civilizations by getting these eggs. So yeah, and that existed as a document that we took around publishers. So it's a kind of bit of a salesy kind of document, but it does specify the details of how the game would run. And it had 2 characters. It had a magic character, but this time it had a character to protect the magic character, who was a girl, and she was kind of like a prototype Guinevere, but I saw her as a kind of almost like a Red Sonja type of figure, long red hair, had a huge kind of sword, and so she'd fight the meanies while the wizard sort of prepared his spells and whatever. So.
Excellent. Now you just have to get on with it, Steve. Right, we've got time for one more question in case anyone else want to ask a question. Yep. Oh, this chap over here.
Mainly for Steve, this one. Apologies, Andrew. There's just hypothetically, if say there was to be a next remake of Quasitron, would you prefer to see it with standard spectrum colours but no colour clash, and then you can recolour Klepto in and all the other robots so that they don't have to be monochrome? Or would you say, let's just use the whole range of the colours that it can do and anticipates the complaints that maybe it looks a bit too much like as an Amiga game? Would you rather see? Because that's been a bit of a discussion around those of us who have Nexts or are about to.
I think if I were doing it, I'd be tempted to kind of actually put in both. So you kind of had a little switch where you could say, okay, this is the original kind of Spectrum kind of look. But funny enough, I was looking at, I've just been coming up finishing a PC game, which is a space game, and I was looking at it the other day and I was thinking, all the spaceship colours and the space stations and everything, I've put Spectrum colours into it. And I've kind of done it without kind of thinking. It's all the ones I've chosen. So there's a kind of Spectrum yellow is the main ship, and there's kind of like the cyan sort of colour some of the bases are got on. So there's something in my brain that's kind of still tuned to those early days and those colours. But you can still put those in and get the Spectrum feel. But I've put in kind of lighting so things all glint and look metallic and whatever. So I think you can kind of be sympathetic to the original, but kind of up the graphics. And I don't see any reason to not eliminate actual colour clash, because you know the attributes were something we fought against, but it was something that I bore in mind with my games. Things like Quasitron, if you look at it, it's very carefully designed to get a lot of colour all around the screen, but then just use 2 colours for the play field where I needed the detail to avoid the clash.
Excellent. Well, it would be lovely to see a version of that, Steve, on the next, certainly, whatever approach you decide to go to. And before we wrap up things, there's a couple of more things we just like to talk about. Firstly, Andrew, Steve and I are working on a Fusion retro book at the moment called The Graftgold Story. So in the theme of Fusion's excellent tomes on Ocean, US Gold and so forth, we're already busy. As you can see, there's quite a chunk already written about Graftgold. So if you want some more Graftgold in your life, then this book, which will be out next year, will be absolutely full, obviously with a lot of input from Andrew and Steve, and also from all the other people such as Dominic Robinson that worked at Graftgold throughout the 80s and 90s, and give you the full story of this absolutely amazing developer.
What a lovely cover.
Yes, and the correct cover as well, yes, as well. So that just about wraps up things for this talk. I'd just like to announce, in case you didn't know, my name's Graham Mason, and I'm the author of ZX Nightmares. The sequel to ZX Nightmares is also going to be out next year from Fusion, called ZX Dreams. So I finally get to play some decent games, including many, of course, Steve's, which will be in the book as well. And that just about wraps things up for us. The only thing left is to say thank you for watching, thank you for listening, And thank you to Andrew and Steve for their time. And Chris and his daughter now are going to be selling signed, lovely signed posters of obviously Steve and Andrew's games, including Avalon, Uridium, the aforementioned Paradroid cover, and that lovely Astrocone cover, which is one of my favourites. So roll up, come and get your posters, your signed posters by Andrew and Steve. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. Thank you.